here many times to speak at our forums, and I'm so happy to have you back. And we have my friend Itzel Vargas. She's a community organizer with the Advocates for Immigrant Rights and Reconciliation. I'm on the board with AIRR. I get to work with Itzel a lot, and she brought a special guest there in the second row who's an adorable little daughter. So we're happy to have you guys here today and looking forward to all the information you're going to share with us. Itzel?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here this morning. Again, my name is Itzel Vargas. I am the program coordinator at AIR, Advocates for Immigrant Rights and Reconciliation. And today we've got, a topic of immigration. It's a big topic, way too complex to try to fit it in all in this short time that we have, but we'll do our best. But I mostly want to talk to you about what we do. So, AIR, as Angela mentioned, is Advocates for Immigrant Rights and Reconciliation. Angela is on the board and was also one of the founding members of the organization back in 2006, 2007 as a response to anti-immigrant rhetoric that we were seeing, and also there was the Minutemen that were trying to have a chapter here in Kansas City. I think they did for a little bit, but then it's too long. So this group of faith leaders and attorneys got together and created the organization. Fast forward to 2010. There was a name change. I always forget what it was called before, but it was a long name. It's still a long name, but and then in 2015 we officially became a 501(c)(3. And we do a lot of things. We do a lot of advocacy, obviously. Legislative advocacy both in Kansas and Missouri, and then national depending on what's happening national, but that's always just too big to really be able to do something concrete. So we try to focus a lot of our efforts on state legislature. In Missouri, here in Missouri, we are working on in-state tuition for immigrant students. So back in 2015, the state legislation added language to the higher education budget bill that makes it so that immigrant students who are not basically permanent residents or citizens have to pay the international rate. And we're not talking, um, you know, um, foreign exchange students. They already have to pay that as a student visa. We're not talking about student visa holders. We're talking about undocumented students, DACA students, students who may be here because their parents are migrant workers and they're here and they've been here for a long time and they finally graduate high school and they have to pay that international rate. International rate is often three times in-state tuition rate. So it virtually makes it impossible for students to be able to attend a public school in Missouri. That also includes community colleges, by the way. It's all Missouri public schools. There was a bill, this legislation, where they were actually trying to just bar completely enrollment by undocumented students. But there was it didn't go through, thankfully. Kansas, we've got primarily in KCK, we have our Safe and Welcoming campaign. It's been going on for a really long time. Judy's also part of Safe and Welcoming. It's kind of a mess right now, and essentially it was a municipal ID program that also had a non-compliance element. That meant that the police in Wyandotte County would not work with ICE. The ordinance passed back in 2022, and then it got shut down by the state like 10 days later, at least the non-sanctuary part. So now Kansas also has a no sanctuary city law in place, and that set back Safe and Welcoming. But the municipal program was going to go forward. Well, now it's on halt at the moment because the basically the unified government is worried about another law that passed last year about human smuggling, and so then that prevented a lot of things happening, at least with the ID moving forward. So that's where we're at right now. We're trying to figure out how to get that implementation happening. And just in general anti-immigrant legislation response and defense. And we do a lot of call to actions to message legislators asking not to approve those anti-immigrant laws. As far as programming, we do know your rights programs. So we go to churches, we go to community centers, we go to libraries, wherever people ask us to go, and we do a know your rights presentation on due process and what that looks like for immigrants and within the immigration system. We also do immigration 101 trainings, which I would say it's a little bit of what this is today for us. It's just where we talk about immigration, whatever the topic may be. People have questions about immigration, about the process, about maybe what's happening at the border, all these things, right? Was we're hearing a lot. So we try to help people find, educate people and find some sort of um, that's the reconciliation part of our name. We try to have people reconciliate with our immigrant community. And then we also have our accompaniment program. And with that, we have a set of volunteers that assist migrants to their ICE check-ins or to immigration court, or really any need that they may have. Sometimes it's municipal court, sometimes, people have just arrived and they don't know where the post office is, and they might need to send immigration documents. Little things like that. We always have our volunteers do that. That's in a nutshell what we do. There's a lot of other things, but yeah. I also so I want to talk about really quick. There's questions about what's happening again at the border. Um, and the mayor's recent invitation for migrant workers to come. And that's kind of created a lot of backlash, a lot of misinformation about what is a migrant worker, where is a non-migrant worker, like what does it mean? And I think that the mayor's been very strategically saying migrant workers who have work permits to come to Kansas City. So um, that means, in general, that we're talking about people that have been through some process in immigration to get a work permit. Um, there's a lot of processes to be able to get a work permit. DACA recipients get a work permit. Some parolees that are being, as far as newcomer people are coming in, get a work permit. There's TPS, and those people can get a work permit. So there's a big umbrella of um, categories that people can apply for a work permit. So there's unfortunately, this rhetoric by the anti-immigrant folks that that means that you know we don't want undocumented people are coming, and that also creates a little bit of tension within me because I also don't like that the language being used is a little exclusionary of undocumented folks, and even those that have been here in Kansas City for a long time, 20 plus years, and it almost sounds like they're not invited, you know. In general, we don't know what the city's plan is for this. We're actually hoping to meet with the mayor's office soon and kind of find out what is the plan because AIR has been getting calls already from people in Denver, from people in New York. They're asking about the migrant shelter, and I'm just like sitting there. Really sorry, there is no migrant shelter. So we're really worried. That people are just going to start coming and end up in houseless situations, might end up in trafficking situations. And so, if we really want to avoid dangerous situations for our newcomer neighbors that will be arriving and that are arriving, there needs to be a plan. So, we're hoping to be able to meet with the city soon, us and hopefully other immigrant serving organizations, and get to create a plan, find out what's going on with that. I don't have much else, and know there's gonna be questions at the end. So if you have questions for me, save them to the end. But I'm gonna give it out to Judy from the Cross Border Network. And Judy's gonna tell us more about the bigger issue of immigration and why people come, why people leave and stuff. So yeah, thank you.
I guess this will work. There's no way I can move that up here. Okay. All right. Thanks. Hi, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be back here at Unsol's, and my voice is going to get better. One of the problems of age, I think. But anyway, none of you have that problem, right? No. So, first off, I just want to say something very briefly about my organization, the Cross Border Network. And I want to thank it. So, I love AIR, and I hope you donate to AIR because they're an organization that really needs support. They are on the ground working all the time with some of the neediest of our immigrant population all over the metro area. The Cross Border Network has more of a global view. We began as an anti racist organization when lots of folks here were saying that those goddamn Mexicans were stealing our jobs. Remember that time back around when they passed NAFTA? And so we began to do a lot of people to people stuff, which we still do. Um, Rather than Mexico right now, we work a lot with Honduras, which you may know the former narco dictator was just convicted in New York City of narco trafficking and weapons charges and will probably spend the rest of his life in prison, thank heaven. And Honduras is a victim of basically U.S. imperialism. And so, and it's generated tons of migrants as a result of that, as have El Salvador, Guatemala, and of course, Mexico. So much of uh, why people have left those countries and come here is really because a lot of U.S. policies towards those countries, U.S. wars in those countries, and huge violations of human rights. But the cross border network basically, we connect the dots between US policies and migration and dislocation of people. With a focus on Latin America, particularly Central America and Mexico. But we also realize that there's a lot of needs here in Kansas City. And so, right at, during COVID, we established what was called the Bienvenido Fund. Bienvenido means welcome in Spanish. And it's a fund that works with local immigration attorneys to help immigrants who can't pay for the sometimes very high U.S. CIS, Citizenship and Immigration, whatever it stands for. USCIS has charges people for whatever they try to do in the whole process of becoming a citizen. So you have to pay for a work permit. You have to pay for DACA renewal. You have to pay for permanent residency. Of course, you have to pay for any psychological tests or physical tests you need in order to be able to win your case. And so the Bienvenido Fund works with attorneys who take care, who are representing some of the neediest of them, and we provide funds to help them with those things so they don't lose their cases because they can't meet the fees. So if you're interested in supporting that, we got a handy little QR code there, which I'll show at the end. Which all you have to do is take a picture of it, and it'll take you to the web page, and you can make a donation. But my real topic here is to scare you to death. Okay. Because I want to talk about basically, this is election prep. I want to talk about what the threat is of a Trump candidacy and how we can work to try to mitigate that. We won't take sides exactly, but we're going to talk about talking points that you can use with people who are sitting on the fence, not with Trumpers, but with people who are sitting on the fence, who are believing some of the lies that are being put out. So Here's a recent quote from Trump. Following the Eisenhower model, we will carry out the largest domestic deportation operation in American history. Trump is threatening to deport as many as he said 20 million people. We don't even know how many undocumented people there are in the United States, but nobody has ever said there are 20 million. So I don't know where he's going to get, the excess above the probably 11 million people who are here without proper authorization. When he talks about the Eisenhower model, he's talking about something called Operation Wetback, uh, a very pejorative term that was used against Mexicans who swam across the Rio Grande River and ended up deporting American citizens in its enthusiasm to get rid of people during a period where it served Eisenhower's interests to look like he was anti-immigrant. So I want you to imagine ourselves a year from now in May of 2025 and Donald Trump is president. And I just want to create a picture of what could happen. So first off, the Muslim ban has been reinstated. And these are all things that he's promising to do. The number of refugees to be admitted has been drastically cut to less than 15,000. 15,000 was what he had cut it to when he was president the last time. And I'm going to get some water. Oops. The National Guard has been called up everywhere and is camped out by Liberty Memorial. From there, with police, sheriffs, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division, and the DEA, troops are fanning out, rounding up undocumented immigrants and anyone who looks like they are here illegally. This is not just a nightmare. This is what Trump says he's going to do. Detention camps have been set up in Texas near the border to hold detainees while they are processed for deportation. They look like Gaza during Israel's genocide. And Trump says he wants to deport, this is 15 million, but he's also said 20 million. But there's more. Public health ban on entry, safe third country, asylum, and remain in Mexico have all been reinstituted. These were the major policies that Trump had during his last administration. And he's promised to reinstitute them, keeping people from applying for asylum, keeping them in very dangerous camps in Mexico, and keeping them out by using some kind of health ban. He can't use COVID anymore, but he'll come up with something else like tuberculosis. Expedited removal has extended to cover those here more than 2 years. Right now, according to a law passed in the 1990s under Clinton, it allowed the Border Patrol and ICE to deport people who had been here less than 2 years without any kind of hearing. But that he says he wants to extend that to people who have been here for longer than 2 years who are undocumented. Visas of foreign students who are pro-Palestinian have been canceled. He's threatened to do that. The U.S. Embassy consular offices in other countries are beginning to do ideological screening of anybody who applies for a visa to come visit the United States. Trump is threatening to revoke TPS, which applies to lots of people from El Salvador, some from Honduras and Guatemala, Haiti, and a few other countries. It's temporary protected status, and he wants to get rid of it. And he also wants to try to get rid of DACA for the youth who were raised here. Trump says he'll push for a constitutional amendment to end birthright citizenship for babies of undocumented people born in the U.S. The Supreme Court has overturned the Flores decision against unsanitary and prolonged detention of children, and close Trump aide Stephen Miller says he will reconsider family separation. Workplace, community, and anywhere raids are occurring in cities, especially in blue states. And one of the things Trump says he's going to do is he's going to call up the National Guard in red states and send them to blue states in order to aid in mass deportations. So I think I have another one here. And Trump has invoked the Insurrection Act in order to be able to use federal troops inside the United States and has revived the Alien Enemies Act from 1798, which would allow for immediate deportation of anyone the president thinks is an enemy of the United States. So this is the picture that he is painting, and his supporters are painting in the media, in their campaign speeches, and clearly the scapegoating of anybody who was an immigrant, particularly anybody who was an immigrant who is also a person of color, it's terrifying. The picture he's painting, and it is already instilling tremendous amounts of fear in our immigrant communities here in the United States. So, all of this is part of Trump's plan or of a special project called Project 2025 of the Heritage Foundation, and it's part of their mandate for leadership, which is preparing the ground for a Trump victory, and has published a 1,000-page book about how they are going to restructure the federal government. I seriously recommend that you look it up and at least look at a summary of it. I don't think I'm going to read 1,000 pages of this crap, but anyway, um, it's scary. It's very scary. The purpose of it is to reshape the U.S. federal government to support the agenda of the Republican Party and President Trump. Its Heritage Foundation is based in Washington, D.C. It has a new director, Paul Dans, who has supervised the development of this project. The main organ is the Mandate for Leadership, which is this big 1,000-page book. They have a budget of $22 million to promote this plan and get ready for a Trump presidency to restructure the government. And what it will do is basically get rid of what they call the deep state. It will dismantle the federal government as we know it. It'll abolish the Department of Education, for one thing. It will restructure our immigration things. And it calls for arrest, detain, and remove immigration offenders anywhere in the U.S. It will abolish the Department of Homeland Security, which could be a good thing, except that what they want to replace it with is actually more ominous because it will combine all immigration-related programs in a separate, I don't know if it's cabinet level agency, including the Border Patrol, ICE, USCIS, which is supposed to process people's applications, parts of Health and Human Services that deal with unaccompanied minors into one agency. It will curtail the admission, they're calling for the curtailing of the admission of refugees, increasing fees for asylum seekers, deporting the undocumented, and deputizing the National Guard in red states to deport people in blue states, and deputizing local police and sheriffs, ATF and DEA in large scale raids. So the entire law enforcement mechanism of the United States would be deputized to focus on the deportation of people who are not here legally. And it will build large scale internment camps. So remember Stephen Miller? Stephen Miller was in the Trump White House previously. He's claiming this is going to rival the construction of the Panama Canal. He's got big plans, and Stephen Miller was one of the authors of Project 2025, and he's been promised a position in the next Trump administration. Oops, that one's. And it isn't just national. We've got local politicians running for office in both Kansas and Missouri who buy into this agenda. Kansas Senate President Ty Masterson said every state in the nation is a border state at this point. It's not much short of an invasion. It's coming. I don't know what it is exactly, but anyway. Kansas Senator Rick Billinger said those against overriding Governor Kelly's veto of the $15.7 million they appropriated to send the Kansas National Guard to the border says, open your eyes. It's estimated that 300 people on terrorist watch lists have slipped across the southern border before their identity could be determined. Needless to say, Senator Billinger never provided any proof of that accusation. In Missouri, Attorney General Jay Ashcroft, one of my favorite leaders, um, upon hearing about Mayor Lucas's statement welcoming immigrant workers, said, good grief, the mayor should be protecting the people of Kansas City and instead is taking away protection to import lawlessness. And we got one more. Jerry Nolte, anybody from the Northland? Clay County. He's a famous anti-immigrant, first legislator, then Clay County commissioner, and now running for the Senate of Missouri. He said forcing these reckless and likely illegal policies will only increase criminal activity and endanger Northland families. So they're all getting on board to, like put fear in everybody of these immigrants and just use it as campaign candy, basically. So I think this is pretty terrifying, but I'd say we can stop this. Um, First off, there's three things we need to do. First, we need to understand their talking points. Secondly, we need to understand how to refute them. And thirdly, we need to talk to undecided voters and spread the word. And that's all of you. You all have friends. You all must know somebody who's thinking about voting for Trump or is just scared about this. And so we really need to, um, get involved, and not just on immigration, but on some of the other talking points as well. But anyway, I'm focusing on immigration. First thing to remember is don't repeat your opponent's frame. So right now, the operative word that they're all using is it's an invasion. Well, even if you say it's not an invasion, you're giving credence to the idea that it's an invasion. It's not. What you need to do is talk about the positive value of immigration, what it is doing for America. So I'm going to give you a few of these arguments. There's a lot more I could make. I'm just in the process of researching this stuff. Actually, the reason I wanted to do this talk is because it kickstarted me, because the Cross Border Network is actually the next project we're taking on is to try to develop messaging to counter the anti-immigrant stuff that's going on, and also to work with candidates who are open to this kind of thing to give them talking points that they can use during the elections, particularly local candidates. So be calm and confident. Yeah, right. Okay. So let's talk about the whole idea of it's an invasion. These are all things that Trump has said. They're criminals, they're terrorists, they're drug dealers, they're animals, they're rapists. They're a threat. They're a threat to MAGA, right? Because they're going to make America not great again, right? Because they're foreigners, they're people of color, they're whatever, they're aliens, and they will replace us. You've heard that, haven't you? Yeah, right. And of course, they aren't white, but we don't say that. Okay, so just some counter ideas. In February, well, before that, 28% of Americans listed immigration as the biggest problem facing the U.S. Good God, where'd they get that? Well, we know where they got it. 55% of U.S. adults say that large numbers of immigrants entering the United States illegally is a critical threat to U.S. vital interests. This is a fear that has been churned up at least since 2001, 911, to get Americans to think there's a threat from immigration. It's created by politicians who need a wedge issue in order to win elections because they don't have anything positive to give us otherwise. So they use fear. Fear of crime is a real winner, and fear can win elections. So what's the response? It's not an invasion. It's a crisis of immigration reform. It's a crisis because we have not for 24 years been able to modernize our immigration laws, which are in sore need of modernization. In the last 3-4 decades, migration has become a fundamental aspect of the global economy. This is not just a US issue, it's an issue around the world. The United Nations says that I think it's 280 million people in the world are working outside of their country of birth. Most of them are not in the United States. Climate change is also a driving force for migration, but it's certainly not the only one. If you want to ask me, I think capitalism is the major force driving people out of their countries. Capitalism and imperialism. But be that as it may, you know, just to counter the invasion language, James Madison said an invasion is an armed hostility from another political entity. That in no way describes what's happening. Trump knows this, and so he doubles down and he says, well, but it's foreign governments that don't like us who are emptying out their mental institutions and sending us these people. Remember the boat lift from Cuba where Castro was supposed to have emptied out his jails? Well, I guess he did some of that, but it's the same kind of scare tactics that he's using. Um, in fact, border crossers are coming to work. They're not coming to invade. They're not coming in with arms. There are not armies of border crossers. People come in small groups and they come to work. And they do everything they can to avoid conflict as they come into the United States. They either try to come in without being found, or they present themselves at a border station and say, I want asylum. That hardly sounds like an invading army. So, what are they talking about? No one mentions that they are the harvest of empire, meaning that they flee U.S. imperialism's impoverishment of other countries through sanctions, Cuba and Venezuela, wars, El Salvador, Guatemala, and coups, Honduras. Right now, a huge number of people are coming from Venezuela. Venezuela has been subjected to some of the cruelest, most draconian sanctions that the U.S. can apply, which has really bankrupted the Venezuelan economy. Yeah, there's a lot of problems with Nicolas Maduro and so on. There's corruption and stuff like that. But those sanctions are what's driving people out, and the U.S. is only marginally let up on them. I mean, it's a country that funded its whole economic development program with oil, and the United States won't permit Venezuela to sell its oil or to use dollars to get dollars for its oil. The whole sanctions regime is another whole topic that really needs to be looked at. But anyway, um, and U.S. immigration policy is broken. To gain legal entry, people who want to become Americans must run an expensive gauntlet filled with traps and absurdities. We used to accept far more immigrants legally than we do today. Just ask Angela about how hard it is for somebody to become a citizen in this country. It's an obstacle course at best. And besides that, many immigrants, uh, having this many immigrants is not really unusual. If you look at the blue line, the purple line shows you the number of people coming, but the blue line shows you the percentage of the population. Sorry. Yeah. And really, the percentage of immigrants in our population is something like 14% right now. It was equal to that in the late 1890s, early 1900s. Immigration historically has gone up and down. We have no more immigrants percentage-wise in our population today than we did 100 years ago. But yet there's this huge scare. But they've been scaring us now since at least the 1840s. Actually, Benjamin Franklin in 1750 complained about the immigrants who were coming who didn't speak English and didn't have our same customs. He was talking about Germans, you know. And the Alien and Sedition Act, I just talked about the Alien Act before, of 1798, was aimed at the French. And then, of course, there was the "oh, no Irish need apply" kind of mentality of the 1840s through the 1900, hatred of Irish who were not considered white, and certainly tremendous fear of Catholics. So, like, scaring us about immigration is an American tradition. And like this particular cartoon, I love it because these heads all have names on them, like anarchist, pauper, illiterate, mafia, outlaw, criminal. That's the ones I can see. And labeling immigrants as being people who bring crime with them is an American tradition as well. Fact is, we have a tremendous shortage of workers in this country right now. We need more labor, and immigrants are key to economic growth. And any economist will tell you that. Um, Many of the essential workers who helped us get out of COVID were immigrants. Thanks a lot, guys. Um, Immigrants have always been key to economic growth in the United States. The U.S. economy, U.S. settlement has grown because of immigration. Almost 9 million positions are open today, needing to be filled. And that's equal to 1.4 jobs for every job seeker. We need more labor. When I am in a store or something, and there's not enough people to, at the checkout line and stuff like that, and they haven't been replaced by machines yet, and I talk to some manager about, why don't you have more help? And they say, well, I just can't find people. Nobody wants to work. I said, open the border. That's what you need to do. Meanwhile, record numbers of baby boomers are leaving the workforce. You guys already left, a lot of you, right? Who replaced you? A surge in the rate of net immigration that began in 2022 will continue through 2026. That rise is projected to expand the labor force and increase economic growth. So says the Congressional Budget Office. Congress itself is telling our members of Congress that they need to have more workers. 1 in 5 U.S. workers is an immigrant today. Jerome Powell, chairman of the Fed, has repeatedly cited immigration as one of the reasons behind strong economic growth. This is why we need comprehensive immigration reform, because we have a lot of people who are already here, who are willing to work, who can't get a work permit. I talk to construction unions here in Kansas City all the time, who would just love to recruit those guys up on roofs in a dangerous situation, who are working for contractors that could care less about paying them a living wage. These unions would love to recruit these guys, but they can't do it because they don't have work permits. Yeah. What? The PowerPoint?
Specifically that slide. You wait till after. Wait.
Sure, I'm willing to share it. I'll share it. Okay. Yeah. As I said, construction unions want more people. And in fact, deporting 10 to 15 million people would absolutely wreck our economy. I mean, how are you going to staff so many of the hotels, the restaurants, the farms? I have a whole list. Food supplies, farms, ranches, meat processing facilities, service industries, home construction, hotels and tourism, house cleaning, etc., etc. Those people will be, we had a day without Mexicans 20 years ago or so. I can't remember when, to try to make that point. It was a general strike, and nobody learned the lesson. So even if we hope to keep funding Social Security, something you guys might have an interest in, um, we need immigrants contributing to it. This shows you the shortfall of people contributing to Social Security over the next 80 years. It'll go bankrupt without new workers contributing. Okay, another talking point of Trump is that immigrants are terrorists, criminals, or drug dealers. Okay, first off, most fentanyl goes through regular ports of entry on commercial vehicles. It's not carried by mom and her kids crossing the border. Studies over decades have found no correlation between immigration and crime. Some found that immigrants actually commit fewer crimes than American citizens do. Um, and there's a whole study on that one that takes all of the studies and summarizes them into one by these guys. But they're going to keep going in the next 6 months till the election or whenever it is, November. 6 months? Yeah. Okay, so expect more inflammatory stories like the one Trump's using right now of the lone undocumented guy who killed a white nursing student in Georgia. And Trump has been touting that one all over. It's because we have so many undocumented immigrants, he says, that this guy killed this woman, right? And he's going to get away with it. I seriously doubt it. They've been using the same trope since the 1840s. So that's all I have. I got my QR code there. And now, Itzel, you want to come back up and we can take questions?
Um, Thank you, Itzel and Judy, so much for taking your time to be with us today. Before we start the Q&A, I just have a few housekeeping tasks to take care of. One, our appreciation to everyone for your financial support as well as your participation here. We're passing the hat now. Over half of the support that we generate for the forum comes from passing the hat. And then just by way of reminder, if you find yourself wishing and thinking, I wish my friends could have heard this today, this talk is available. Each week's forum is broadcast 9 days later on KKFI. So we thank them for their support. And if you can't wait 9 days, or there's another forum topic that you would like to pass on to friends or view again, you can pick that up at allsoulskc.org, where we have all of our forums for the last several years available to people. Another announcement. This week, Thursday evening, 6:30, we'll have a forum meeting. This is to talk about changes to the current forum model that would help us generate more involvement and have a broader reach. So I would encourage anybody who's interested in helping form that discussion to join us Thursday evening, 6:30 in the meeting room here at church. And then finally, next week's program, which is the last program of this year, will be a memorial for two strong supporters that we have lost this spring, which would be Rita Norton and Jefferson Lewis. There are others who've passed in this past year that we'll remember as well, but those two in particular. So there will be a brunch served at 9, starting at 9 before the forum begins at 9:30, and we encourage you to come. That brunch is being provided by Diane and Sharon Cassidy. So please express your appreciation to them as well. Yes, and that forum event will not be live streamed. Thank you. Okay, we'll start our Q&A period. We'd ask that you would line up on that side So if the speakers have a sense of how many people there are who are waiting to ask questions, and they can time their responses accordingly. Again, please remember you're asking questions, you're not making comments, and be respectful. Thank you.
Hi. Hi. Thank you both for your presentations today. I do would like if you would answer, can you speak about how many American corporations actually put up billboards and job advertisements in Mexico in general to come up and work in such as meat processing plants and other places such as Bakersfield, California, for migrant workers and how that's done? Can we just-
Yeah, I can't tell you how many American corporations do this. I know that for decades now, U.S. corporations have been recruiting in Mexico, bringing people in both with visas and without. Some of them are doing it on HB visas for temporary work as much as 6 months, and some of them are just bringing people in illegally. It's a common practice. It's a common practice to also promise people that they're going to get documented status, but in fact, they then have them on H-2B visas or something else and rip them off. There's a book that recently came out by actually an Indian author. He's American, but he's from India, named Saket Soni, called "The Great Escape," of how workers after the Hurricane Katrina were brought in from India, who each paid thousands and thousands of dollars. They were in hock up to their ears to supposedly get green cards. And in fact, they were on H-2B visas and being worked mercilessly in shipyards in Mississippi. And Saket Soni, who ran a worker center in New Orleans, engineered an escape. And they actually walked to Washington, D.C. and camped out near DuPont Circle in order to protest. And um, I'm not sure what happened to them. I actually ended up interviewing them on the Heartland Labor Forum on KKFI, but um, that's just one example, and it's rampant. I know Tyson and Sedalia was bringing in undocumented workers from Mexico. Um, there's not a whole lot of enforcement of that, um, and it's pretty exploitative.
Yeah. Okay. My question. Uh, my grandfather was Irish and he made a successful business. So he explained to my mother that she should stay away from the colored people who were from Sicily.
Mhm.
Yeah. Uh, luckily, she escaped that kind of stuff. How effective is it reminding people that, well, from Sweden, from Ireland, from all these other places, you too were an immigrant, as was Trump's parents.
Right.
How
Yeah.
effective is that?
I think, it's effective as in trying to get rid of that mentality. I think there's just in general, and the Irish example is a great example. There's this is kind of like when we're talking about the racialization of the immigration system, right? There's been throughout history um specific groups that have been kicked out. And it started with the Germans, started with the other people, right? And then the Irish were they're not considered white, but eventually more people that don't look white start coming and they're like, okay, actually you're white. And it's also happening with the Latino community. The I don't know if you know, but in a lot of like the census and stuff, when us like we're trying to fill out our race, It does not give an option like we've been forced to write or check mark white in the census and all these other like official forms. That's the, I don't know how to explain, like the whiteization of certain people. And I think once, and there's, I can at least say for Latin America, there's this thing called colorism, right? It's just the way that race happened in Latin America because the Spanish had a caste system where you aspired to be white, right? Or to be considered white. And so when you reach that peak, when you're finally accepted or seen as white, I think it's a little hard to remember that your family was also immigrant, that your family was also um, looked down on. Because it's not nice remembering that your ancestors were looked down on. It's hurtful, it hurts. That's that generational trauma that nobody wants to acknowledge it. And so I think I don't know how effective it will be because maybe in a way you're kind of forcing people to think about that generational trauma. And they're at a good place now. They don't want to go back. Yeah.
I guess to Judy, Hugo Chavez gave a book to Obama years ago called "The Open Veins of Latin America" by
Oh yeah.
Eduardo Galeano. And in that book, it appears it's a message I think that ought to be stressed in the United States is how much we have essentially evolved, caused a lot of this problem economically in these countries. Would you address that topic a little bit? And
Sure.
that should be part
Thanks.
of the program of explaining, I think.
I think it should be. It's very hard to work that in, um, because people don't have any historical memory. I think, and so it's hard. And but uh, of course, and it wasn't just the United States. In the case of Galeano's book, it was Spain and Portugal that created the system of exploitation in South America, in particular, of and the enslavement of indigenous people. But as far as what written more recent past, um, U.S. policies of so-called free trade and what's called neoliberal policies, which begin in the 1980s, policies of international debt, slavery, all of which have really seriously contributed to the exodus of poor people from Latin America and particularly from Mexico and Central America. Um, I remember back in the 90s working with Craig to debate NAFTA and CAFTA and uh, and beginning to understand the tremendous dislocation that NAFTA caused in Mexico, particularly for campesinos, agricultural people who were bankrupted by our free trade policy, our so-called free trade policies. Um, Trade agreements which the United States negotiated during that time, and that includes CAFTA, the Central America Free Trade Agreement, have basically created an exodus of people from the countryside of these countries who can no longer make a living on the land. And they become migrants. They become migrants in the capital cities of their own countries, and they become migrants in coming into the United States. But then there's other kinds of exploitation as well. Um, what we learned in Mexico in the 90s and early 2000s was that these corporations who left the United States and Missouri got gutted by NAFTA. Corporations leaving, our entire shoe industry left, our garment industry left. St. Joseph, Missouri was a basket case after all of the exodus of corporations from that town to China, Mexico, and points south. Um, St. Louis was really damaged, and Kansas City less so by the exodus of it. But like there's a number of people who are really starting to talk about how politics in the United States was really affected by this. And people love to blame racism for the move to the right in the United States. But there's a whole other theory, and I'd really recommend a book by Les Leopold. The name escapes me right now. Which talks about the fact that so many blue collar workers felt abandoned by the Democratic Party because of policies like NAFTA and the deregulation of banks and the beginning of stock buybacks and other deregulatory things, which caused raiding of corporations and tremendous job loss. So it isn't just that the U.S. policies of protecting our corporations in places like Mexico or Nicaragua or Honduras or wherever, and the invasion of U.S. corporations into these places. You go to Honduras and you drive down a street and you've got every fast food company in the world, well, in the U.S. there. And there's just a tremendous number of U.S. corporations dominating the economies in these countries. But I'll stop there. All right.
Many of the anti-immigration people that I hear from are fearful about the expanding welfare roles that immigrants cause. Would you speak to that, please?
Let me just be clear about one thing. If people do not have status, and by that I mean specifically green card or citizenship, majority of them do not qualify for any welfare. I am a DACA recipient. I do not qualify for welfare. I am putting money into the Social Security, like Judy was talking about, when I get old enough and ready to retire. And if I don't have status yet, I cannot get that money back. I do not get that money back. I cannot apply for disability. I cannot apply for food stamps, nothing. If I'm struggling, I have to. Thankfully, my child is a U.S. citizen, so if she ever needs anything, she will be able to. But not me, not my husband, or anybody else that I know that is undocumented or does not have a green card status. Even with a green card status, you have to wait. It's 5 years, right, Angela, to apply for. Is it all welfare or just Medicaid? Any assistance? Yeah, any assistance. So it's a it's also a big talking point from people, anti-immigrant people, that they're gonna drain the welfare system, and it's just really not true. It's a false news, fake news.
Again, thank you both for coming today. We're going to continue our discussion down the hall in the library. So join us there. Thank you.
Thank you.